Hey, seventh graders, how you doing this morning? Decided to do a little video on our next series in our tool identification and use stuff. And today we're going to do some woodworking tools, some common tools, not every woodworking tool. I've got them laid out here. I'm going to demonstrate a couple things too. We're going to start with some measuring and marking tools and then go into some other types of tools here. Of course, the most common measuring and marking tool is the tape measure, which we've all used in the shop. Most of them have a lock like that, but a lot of people don't know that the end of the tape measure, this little thing that you hook on to measure something, slides back and forth. It's supposed to slide back and forth. It's just a little bit. The reason for that is it slides out when you're measuring outside of something like that, but if you want to measure an inside measurement, that little piece slides in just enough to compensate for the thickness of that material. In other words, it would be inaccurate if you didn't have that thing slide back and forth. So it slides about the same as that thickness of that little end piece right there. So tape measure right there. Also for measuring and marking, we have a few different types of squares. Squares are tools that have a 90-degree angle on them, and we use them on the edge of the board. Most squares have something to catch the edge of the board. Then you can mark either 90 degrees, but this one you can mark a 45 as well. And it's got a bunch of other measurements there for carpenters use for laying out rafters and stairs and things like that to get the angles that you would need for those. So that's called a speed square, that one there. And then we have some of these in the shop. This one's called a combination square because it has a combination of angles. It's got the 90 right here. It's got the 45. It's got a ruler scale on it that you can read from different sides. It also has a little bubble level that you can check to see if something is level. You see that bubble lines up right on that line, and you know it's level. You can see that. Move this little thumb screw out, and it loosens the slide there, the ruler, so you can slide that in either direction for a lot of different things. You can set it for a specific measurement, and then you can use that to transfer measurements the same on board. So that's a combination square. And then you've got a much larger square. This one here, which is called a framing square, this is good for checking to see if something big like an inside of a cabinet or a corner of a wall is square or 90 degrees, and you can see it's got a bunch of measurements on it. Inch scales around the edges, but also this is used by carpenters for also laying out rafters, the roof framing, and also stairs, stair treads, and things like that, things that require angles and cuts like that. So that's a framing square. And then you have something, well, you have this one here, which we all know. This is a level, the bubble level. When the bubble lines up, you can see that between the two lines, and you know something is completely level, like that. And you can also use it for checking what's called plumb to see if something is vertical. You lay it along a post and get that bubble between the two lines, and you know it's perfectly vertical. That's called plumb. And we have something called a unique one. This is not a square, but it's a sliding T-bevel. So the way it works is kind of like an adjustable square. You slide it out, a little thumb screw on the end there so I can lock it in. What I would use this for is if I wanted to transfer, let's say I wanted to copy this angle, I can put it on that, adjust it down to that angle. Now I can put that same angle and mark it on the other end of the board or on another board. So it's for transferring angles. It's called a sliding T-bevel. Complicated name, but and then they make that in a few different styles. Here's kind of an older one. Comes out like that. It's got wood. It's got more of a wood handle. Locks in there like that. So very similar tool. And let's see what else we have here. We have something called a unique tool, which is just called a plumb bob. This big brass weight attached to a string. This would be used for determining if something is plumb or perfectly vertical, and basically uses gravity. So if you want to align a post or something from the ceiling to the floor, and you want to get the same exact spot between the ceiling and the floor, you just run that string up to the spot where you want the post to be on the ceiling, and then let that plumb bob go down to the floor, let it sit there until it stops swinging, and then you mark that point where it hits. So handy for lots of things where you want to find the exact level that something is going to be at from floor to ceiling, and lots of other uses too. It's called a plumb bob. You can see it's a heavy brass weight there with a point on it. And this one here, this is called a chalk line. And what it has on it, it's got a string, and it's got a little crank so you can crank the string back up in there. But it has a hook on the end of that string, and it's filled with chalk dust. And this would be used for marking lines. Let me demonstrate that on this piece of wood here. Piece of plywood here. So if I want to make a line across the board, I'd make my marks. Then I hook my string chalk line to one end and bring it across the board and hold it flat and stretch it kind of tight. And then when I pull it up and snap it, it leaves a chalk line. So I can make my cut on that line. That's what's called the chalk line. Probably using that, and then it cranks right back up just like a fishing reel. That's a chalk line and plumb bob, and of course we have these in the shop on the scratch all, marking holes, making scratches in wood, all that kind of stuff. All right, so those are measuring and marking tools. We'll move into, I guess, hammers and tools like that. Of course, we have a few different types of hammers, and we have some of these in the shop here. This is a common type of hammer that we call a claw hammer, used for woodworking. This one happens to be a curved claw hammer, which means that claw is curved up, which is much better for pulling nails. I can demonstrate that, pulling nails out of a board. The problem with that is it puts a handle at kind of a weird angle like that, but it makes it difficult to get into a tight spot like where there's walls or something like that, so you don't have as much clearance. Something like this kind of hammer is called a claw hammer as well, but it's a straight claw. And you can kind of see the difference between the two claws there. Straight claw hammer can pull nails as well, but not as well, but it can pull nails. But the handle now is at a much better angle, so you can get into tight spots with it. And this one here, I think, is a 20-ounce hammer. This one's a 60-ounce. That's the weight of the head in ounces. Yeah, this is a 16-ounce. That's a 20-ounce. This one here is much bigger. This is a framing hammer. This one is a 22 or 24 ounce, I think. It might be a 24 ounce hammer. I can't read it anymore. It's got what's called a waffle head on it, which is a little bit of a grip for the nail. Less likely to slip off the nail when you're using it. So it's a pretty big, heavy hammer for framing, which means building walls and things. And then you've got some tools that are used for ripping boards apart. It's called a flat bar or a wonder bar. And usually it's a thinner bar, flat bar. It gets in between boards. You can hammer it in between boards in either direction, this way or this way. And you can also, these little things here are used for pulling nails. If you get under a nail head, you can pull a nail out with that. Here's a much smaller version of that same tool right here. You get into really tight spaces and rip apart smaller things. This is a much larger tool of destruction. This is a pry bar or crowbar, and it's got a bent end for a tremendous amount of leverage if you're ripping out a nail or pulling a board out. And of course, this end has a bend in it too, so you can slide this underneath something and you get a tremendous amount of mechanical advantage. I've used this bar to lift some of the big heavy machines we have in the shop and move them around a little bit. It's amazing how many hundreds of thousands of pounds you can lift with just that little bit of leverage there. We have what's called a cat's claw or cat's paw, which is a nail pulling tool. This is designed to dig into a nail head once it's already been sunk into a piece of wood, and we can get it back out. Maybe I'll demonstrate that one in a second here. And then here's kind of a smaller version of that same tool for pulling nails out. So when we're hammering and using nails, what we always want to remember is we usually go through if we're nailing a thin piece to a thick piece, we go through the thin one into the thick one. This is a common nail, and when we start a nail, of course, we start it with our hand nice and straight, and then we can hit it the rest of the way. Hammering is kind of takes a little practice, but a couple of tricks that'll help you. First of all, don't choke up so much on the handle. You'll never be able to get enough mechanical advantage to hammer that in. And also, we see a lot of people don't hold the hammer level. This handle has to be perfectly horizontal in order for you to hit that nail straight. If you hold it like this, it's going to push the nail off that way or that way or that way. So that's the key to getting a nail stay straight. And of course, keep your, just like baseball, keep your eye on the ball when you're hitting, keep your eye on the nail. I don't want to hammer into my workbench. So we sunk that nail all the way in. That's a 10-penny nail, so it only went through those 2 pieces of 2x. But you see how that's sunken in there now. So it is possible to get that back out. Open up my vise here. Put it in the vise. We'll see if we can get that nail back out. It's kind of a homemade vise I have here. Let's see if we can get that out of there. So we take our cat's paw, or nail puller. I don't know if you can see that, but I'm going to put it right next to the nail head. And I'm going to kind of drive it in. And it will start to bite underneath that nail head. See if we can do this without pulling it out of the vise. There we go. Oh, we pulled it. We pulled the whole nail out. Pulled the whole board out, actually. You see how that pulled that nail up. Now I got it up enough where I can use my hammer to pull it out the rest of the way. Like that. And notice when you go so far like that, it gets a little bit harder to pull. It's helpful if you have something to add a little additional leverage to it like this. And you can pull it out the rest of the way. The nail stays straight as well. Alright, so those are our hammering and nailing tools. And then we've got over here, got some more tools. So tools for shaping. We're familiar with, excuse me, some of these tools here. This one, of course, we have these in the shop. This is a file, and this happens to be a half-round file. And then we've got something called it's a rat tail file or a round file. Looks like a tail of a rat. This would be for filing into, just round spaces. This was a kind of a gift from a student. This big file, and it's got a rasp on one side and a file on the other. This is a file that's used by furriers. Furriers are people who do horseshoeing, so they have to file down the hoof of the horse, I guess, as they get, to clean them up before they shoe them. Not exactly sure how they do that, but a really sharp file for that. And of course, we know how to use a file. We've used files in the shop before. They always work kind of diagonally with a file. We don't usually work straight across. So, for example, let me get this board set up here and show you. So if we're working along an edge, we take our file. We use the big one here. And we kind of go forward and diagonally like that. So I'm holding both ends, pushing this way, and then pushing forward at the same time. That way we take an even amount all the way across. If we just go this way, it's going to take a very uneven amount. This way, much better and a much smoother cut as well. And for cleaning files, you can see how they get, sometimes they get a buildup of sawdust. We have what's called a file card, which is a brush that we use like that to kind of clean out the sawdust or anything that builds up in the file. That's a file card. And some other cutting tools I have here. Well, let's jump to the planes. This is called it's got a few different names. It's called a plane. This one happens to be either a smoothing plane or jack plane, depending on the length of this base here, this shoe. And you can see the blade comes down at an angle into the shoe here. Got 2 handles on it. See the blade sticking out the bottom there, very sharp. I can adjust the blade with this little screw knob here. If I turn that, it moves the blade down further, or if I turn it the other way, it moves it back out. And this little lever here makes sure that the blade is straight. I can adjust that side to side to make sure that that blade is perfectly parallel to this surface here. So a hand plane would be used for, we can use it for a lot of different things, but if you want to flatten out an edge, like this edge was a little bit wavy. I hold it like this, I'm filing the board. You see how it takes a nice shaving of wood all the way across there. If it wasn't flat, it would only be taking the high spots until it was flat. And now this is pretty flat, so it's taking a full shaving all the way across like that. And I can keep going. So even if I had something like a door that wasn't fitting, I could plane the edge of that. You can actually plane the surface of a board too. If it wasn't flat, you could do the same thing and you could make it flat. Planes are really handy. Old tool they used to use before they had machines to flatten out boards. That's called a jack plane, and then we have a littler one here. It's called a block plane. This one, the blade's at a little bit different angle, and the bevel is a little bit different on it. But this can be used the same way, but it can also be used on the end of a board for end grain. Maybe take the corner off the edge there, like that. Put a little 45 on it. Handy tools to have around. And then we've got also for some cutting tools, we have chisels here. A couple different wood chisels, different widths. You buy a whole set of these, they have different sizes. So a wood chisel would be used for example, chiseling out a groove. I already cut on this piece of wood, I cut a couple of lines on the saw here. And now I can go back and chisel that material out. I'll show you how that works. With any kind of chisel, usually you have to hit it, right, with a hammer of some kind. And it kind of depends on what you hit it with, depends on what the chisel is made out of. So, for example, the end of this chisel has steel on it. It's metal, so that means I can hit it with something made out of steel, so I can hit it with a steel hammer. If I had a wooden chisel with a wooden handle, I wouldn't want to hit it with this. I'd want to hit it with a wooden mallet, or perhaps a rubber mallet like that to protect the handle. So plastic too. If I had a plastic handle, I wouldn't want to hit it with my metal hammer. It would ruin it. But this one has a steel, so I can hit it with steel. And the chisel, I'm picking the chisel that's the same width of the groove that I want here. So I can, if I hold it bevel up like that, it's really going to dig into the wood a lot, but it might start to dig a little too much. So as I get closer to the bottom of the groove, like that, I might want to turn the chisel over. If the bevel, which is this angle right here, if I turn that down, it's less likely to dig too deep. It's not going to dig too deep at all. I can get that groove exactly depth I want. Like that. I could probably keep going on that, but you get the idea there if you can see that. But there's the groove. I could have gone a little bit further. As long as I held that bevel this way, not that way. If I held it this way, it's going to really dig down and probably split out the board. So that would keep going. I can get that just as flat as, almost as flat as any machine could, as long as I get the right kind of sharp chisel for that. Let's see what else we have over here. We have another shaping tool. This one here is a little dangerous, I guess, but this one's called a draw knife. So this would be for something, let's set our board up again here. This would be for lots of things. I've used them for lots of things. Mostly it's for shaping things round or taking the edge off of something. It can be used for really rough work even, like even just taking bark off of a log or something like that. You're holding your handles and you're pulling towards you. There's a big chunk out of that one there. You see how it's taking the edge off like that. And I could take the surface off. But if I wanted to round something over, maybe round the edge of this out. So that's called a draw knife. It's got a really sharp, long blade on it. A lot of these, this is an old one, and a lot of the more modern ones, the handles actually fold in against the blade to protect the blade, make it safer too. We have one in the shop I can show you guys as well. So that's a draw knife, and then we've got a couple of drilling devices here. This one is just we're familiar with drills. We've talked about drills in the shop. This is kind of a large auger bit. Okay, the ones that have the wide twists in it are called auger bits. And then the smaller ones are called, with the smaller twists, are called twist drills. This one here is kind of a unique tool. It's called a Yankee drill. And it's actually a drill. And in the handle, if I loosen this little thing up here, the handle drops down, and there's all kinds of bits in there, little drill bits, different sizes. So I'm going to pull one out of there and close up my handle, tighten it back up. And this end here is where the drill bit goes. I put it in there the correct way, and I tighten that down. The way this thing works, if you can see it there, if I want to drill a hole in the edge there, all I do is push up and down, it'll start to make a hole like that. Start to make a hole up and down. Pretty easy, pretty simple. You don't require any power or anything like that. So if you want maybe a quick hole to start some screws, you can just do that there. Hopefully you guys can see. So that's called a Yankee drill. And then there's a few saws here. This is just a regular hand saw. I mean, I have all kinds of power tools and machines, but this still is necessary for a lot of different things. You cut to a corner of a notch or something like that. So you cut it straight. This one here is a nice short multi-purpose blade, but you get different types that cut across the grain, and it's called a cross-cut saw, and you have the kind that cuts with the grain, which is called a rip saw. This one's kind of unique. It's got a handle itself is a square, so I can use the back. If I put the handle up against the board, I can use the back of a saw. The saw as actually a square like that, which is kind of handy. And I try to keep the blade covered up so that it doesn't get dull if it's upside down. And then there's another type of saw. Here we have a smaller version of this. You have these smaller saws with these pistol type grips. These are called either compass saws or keyhole saws. If you have an opening in the board, you can't get in there with another hand saw. You can get in there with this and cut your way around and make it bigger or change the shape of it. It's something you can stick into a hole to cut. So that's either a compass saw. I think the compass saws are the bigger versions, and the keyhole saws are much smaller. Like this one here would be a keyhole saw. And I think that pretty well covers everything that I have here. I mean, there are lots of other tools and things that we can look at, but we'll do maybe power tools on another day. So hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.